Good morning. That was Debbie Friedman, a voice many of us know with an Orange County connection, in that Debbie Friedman sadly passed too early, too young, and is buried here in Orange County at Harbor Lawn. As many of us, had the chance to know her, to sing, and hear her sing. That song, Not by Might, Not by Power, Eric was kind enough to research for me, was written in 1974, or at least that version. We'll conclude today with another version. And here's what's interesting. As Debbie Friedman sang it in 1974, she sang, not by might, not by power shall all men be free. And in the version we're going to conclude with, all men is going to get changed, which is to say, as somebody who's actively engaged in translating the Psalms, there's choices that are made, and what our ears are sensitive to, like the male-female distinction, whether for people being all men, now we would say all people, or God being a man and saying capital H when describing God. That's something that's changed over the last 45 years. So that's to be brought into mind and into focus as we read our Psalms, is that, again, every translation is an interpretation. And one of those key gaps or changes, again, is this issue of the genderification of community and God. And I probably spend a third to half my time in preparing, which frankly is many hours, for each of these Psalms, engaged in the process of translation. So every translation that we share is one that I've worked on with many translations before me, and at the end of the process, my playing with what feels right to my ear. And among those key choices is never referring to God as he. So I will put in brackets, as you'll see today, when it's God as a he, meaning the pronoun he, I'll just put God. I once had the privilege to work at the 92nd Street Y in New York, that great concert and lecture hall. I did that for the 3 years I was a rabbinical school student in New York. And once I was tasked with picking up a professor from her hotel, she was already in her 80s, and bringing her by cab to give her lecture at the 92nd Street Y. And her topic, her name was Professor Marie Sirkin. She taught at Brandeis, wrote one of the early biographies of Golda Meir. Her father had been one of the founders of the Zionist movement, Shomer Tzair. And as we were in the cab going to her lecture, I said to her, and her topic was going to be Zionism, I said, what are you going to say tonight that's new? And we had never met before. I was young and she was older. She kind of tilted her head at me and said, new? What do you mean new? There's maybe 3 or 4 times in a century that something is said new. What I hope to do tonight, which is the nature of how knowledge unfolds, is to say something familiar in an unfamiliar way. And it really stuck for me, that what is the art of presenting is not saying something that's never been said before, but saying something familiar in an unfamiliar way. And I start with that story because it's at the center of today's psalm, namely, not by might, not by power, but with the Spirit of God, is the prophet Zechariah 4, chapter 4, verse 6. It's our Haftarah for the Shabbat of Hanukkah. And it's the key theme of our psalm as I see where our psalm is going. In fact, I'll look to share with you at the end why I think this is such a powerful psalm for this COVID moment. But the key thrust, the direction of this psalm leads us to say, here, let me quote the psalm. No ruler is delivered by great might. A warrior is not rescued by great strength. Horses are a sham for deliverance, and a great army does not enable escape. Behold, the eye of Adonai is toward the awestruck, toward them that yearn for God's kindness, to deliver from death their soul and to keep them alive, even in famine. Which is to say, not by might, not by strength, it's not human force, but the Spirit of God. So that's the theme, not a theme that doesn't appear anywhere else, but a theme said, sung in an unfamiliar way in this psalm, Psalm 33. Here's what's distinctive about this psalm. First, at the outset, there's no mention of David or even the word psalm. It begins, sing gladly, righteous ones, rananu tzadikim badonai. And the word tzadikim is in the plural. Sing, righteous ones of God. It's a call for chorus. It's a call for the listeners to sing along with the psalter. So this psalm distinctly is a song. And at the outset, you'll see it's identified as being song of praise with a harp with 10 strings. We don't know exactly what that instrument was, but we can imagine from that being identified that this is a song or a psalm that's, again, a musical, as is the nature of psalms. They are praises to God that are to be sung, in this case, together. A pause in that regard, which I emphasized last week in looking at the Psalms. In contrast to paganism, God does not depend on us to provide food for God. That's not what the sacrifices are. Rather, the sacrifices are of a twofold kind, as are these words. They somehow, from the Psalter's point of view, meet a need of God for praise. That, if you will, God seeks the nourishment or the validation or the joy of hearing our song, not unlike the description in the Bible of Isaiah chapter 6 of God having a chorus in the heavens of the angels. So this notion that God is a ruler who loves to hear appreciation. That's one. And the second part, back to an offering in the time of the temple, which is ostensibly when the Psalms were written and when they were, and what we know when they were sung, is that it's for the pilgrim. We've had pilgrim songs, that we have a need to sing praises of God. We need to, in singing, cultivate our trust in God, for in doing so, we gain calm, ashrei, that key word. And here distinctly, we're going to have the word ashrei, but for the community. And we gain a sense of trust in the future by praising God. This psalm will artfully describe God as both the creator of heaven and earth, using words that echo Genesis and the creation story. But you'll see very artfully, particularly in verse 7 of the 22, which means like 1/3, like the bullseye 1/3 in, there'll be a description of the waters and God separating the waters, which is day 3 in the creation story, moves the waters to reveal the earth in the creation story. But it's also using the vocabulary of Exodus chapter 15, verse 8, the Song of the Sea, with the description of the walls of the water, parted and standing. So in verse 7, you get the image artfully woven by the choice of words that this creator, much of it's about creation, is also the God who entered into history on account and for the Jewish people, the Israelites, For this is a song that is both a description of God who is universal, but it will then move to a God who has a chosen people. Clearly, the Psalter, he's calling on fellow Israelites in the time of the temple to sing, to praise God who is distinctly in creation stories of the ancient world, universal and particular. But it's a God who, as we'll see, is a God who cares about us as individuals. In Hebrew, the word is hashgacha pratit, which means that God is managing each of our lives, is overseeing, mashgiach. That's the word used for kosher supervision, where you look very closely to see, has everything been tended to in terms of the details of expectations. And so we have that word hashgacha here in terms of God, despite being big, creator, capital C, at the same time has a chosen people and more, cares about us as individuals. And that leads to that punchline, which again echoes Zechariah, and you can't say which came first, frankly. Technically, the Psalms would have come first, and Zechariah would have come later, because Zechariah is the prophet during the exile in Babylonia, bringing the people and prophesying for their return. So, and Psalms are probably earlier, though there may be overlap, but it's not relevant. That key message was, it's not the originality of the idea that makes a psalm remarkable, memorable, and powerful. It's not the originality of an idea, it's the context and how ideas are woven. And in this case, this is woven as a communal celebration, unlike the other psalms we've had to this point, in terms of a choral piece for the community. But here's the catch, which I had in my introduction that I mailed to you. And this is pointed out by Rabbi Benjamin Siegel. It's not clear if the entire psalm is sung by the Psalter, like, listen to my song, people, or if it's listen to my song and then they join in the song. The last three lines, for the first time, are in the plural, and the suffix of we occurs 7 times over and over. So clearly the last 3 lines sound like we are singing. But it's possible, because the first 3 lines, back to symmetry, the first 3 verses of this psalm are the invitation to sing a new song. That phrase, shiru lo shir chadash, sing to God a new song, occurs in one other psalm, Psalm 96. It's the opening verse. And I pause to smile, is also in conflict with another idea. Ein kol chadash mitachat hashemesh. Kohelet says there's nothing new under the sun. And yet, here the Psalter says, sing a new song. And so, is there new? Is there not new? Of course, that's all a matter of context. But there is, back to the psalm, a sense of, let us share something fresh, a new song, a collective expression of praise of God. And opening 3 are the invitation, closing 3 are the plural, and in between is the question, are people singing along beginning at verse 4 to verse 9 through 19 or not? And here's why it matters. Verse 18 and 19 says, behold, the eye of Adonai is toward the awestruck, toward them that yearn for God's kindness, to deliver from death their soul and to give them alive and keep them alive in famine, which is, for those who are fearful of God, yirah, I choose to translate as awestruck, uncomfortable with the emphasis on fear. I mentioned last week Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi in his translation. He chooses to translate yira as respect. In any event, is the Psalter saying, join me, and if you do, I'll feel better. I'll be aware that God rewards those who sing. So join me so that I will be rewarded too. So for Benjamin Siegel, the issue of how much and why he's asking them to sing, is it for his benefit or is it for theirs? Are they singing along? And the truth at the end of the day, like all great poetry, it doesn't really matter and probably is all together. That tension is part of the resonance, part of the energy of the psalm. Well, with that is a longer introduction than usual. And I had a need to do a longer introduction than usual because, again, when you begin to read it the first time, you go, well, this all sounds kind of familiar. What's distinctive? Let me now read it in English and then unpack a little bit more before a short conversation. And what we're going to do at the very end, I've asked Eric to play another recording of Not by Might, Not by Power, that Hanukkah Haftorah of Zechariah, because you'll hear Debbie Friedman in the later version, not the 1974, but later, pulling out all men shall be free to make it all people. To again highlight how one of our great singers, psalters of our day, not like many of us translators, have changed in how we use language. Okay, the translation of Psalm 33. Sing gladly, righteous ones of Adonai, for the upright psalm is befitting. Wait, I'm not yet fully practiced in posting things. That's because I'm too excited. So let me put up the words. Here we go. Let me start again with the words. Sing gladly, righteous ones of Adonai, for the upright psalm is befitting. Give praise to Adonai with the lyre, with the 10-stringed harp, hymn to God. Sing a new song, play skillfully amid shouts of joy. For the word of Adonai is upright, and all God's doing is with faithfulness. Loving righteousness and justice, Adonai's kindness fills the earth. By the word of Adonai the heavens were made, and by the breath of God's mouth all their array. Gathering as a heap the waters of the sea, placing in treasure houses the deep waters. Let all the earth have awe for Adonai. Let all the inhabitants of the world dwell with respect. For God spoke, and it came to be. God commanded, and it stood. Adonai thwarts the counsel of the nations, overturns the thoughts of peoples. The counsel of Adonai will stand forever. The thoughts of God's heart are for generation to generation. Happy is the nation, Ashrei Hagoy, for whom Adonai is God, the people whom was chosen for God's inheritance. From heaven, Adonai looks, seeing the whole of humanity. From the place of God's dwelling, God examines intently. Hishkiach, all who dwell on the earth, who fashions together their heart and understands all their doings. No ruler is delivered by great might, a warrior is not rescued by great strength. Horses are a sham for deliverance, and a great army does not enable escape. Behold, the eye of Adonai is toward the awestruck, toward them that yearn for God's kindness, to deliver from death their soul, and to keep them alive in famine. Our spirit waits for Adonai, our help and our shield is God. For in God our heart will rejoice, because in God's holy name we do trust. May your kindness, Adonai, be upon us as we have yearned for you. So let me point out just a few things in this psalm before I open it up for listening to that final version of Debbie Friedman and then some reactions. So you saw here in verse 7, Kones Kened Me Hayam. That is translated as gathering as a heap the waters of the sea. And Kined Me Hayam, those three words, are, as I noted, also in the Song of the Sea. So there's a double entendre in terms of, is this referring to God on day 3 of creation, or is this referring to the God, the liberator from Egypt? That's the artfulness. And everybody, we assume that the readers, all the more in an oral tradition, knew the Song of the Sea, knew the words of the creation account, and the words here are resonant. I point to verse 4 because it's the bridge that will lead to a description of God as creator, but emphasizing that what is distinctive about this theology is that God is yashar, upright, and that's usually in the context of moral. He is upright, straightforward, honest, and all God's doing is with faithfulness, emunah, that same word as like the word amen, faithful, truthful, and ohev tzedakah umishpat, loving righteousness and justice. Chesed Adonai malach haaretz, the kindness of Adonai fills the earth. And so again, this is not Aristotle's unmovable mover, right? The initiator of creation. This is a God who gathers the heap of the waters of the sea, who is the one in verse 9 who spoke and it came to be. This is the God of creation, but a God of both kindness and justice, and a God who is active in history. Verses 10 and 11. Those who counsel against God, their counsel will be thwarted, implying that it is God who will intercede. And I love Ashrei Hagoy. In Yiddish, a goy is a Gentile, a non-Jew. But I want to point out that the word goy in Hebrew simply means nation, and it's also used for Israelites. This is maybe the first time in our Psalms where the word ashrei, which is translated as happy, means more than just happy. It's a quality of inner content, of a calm inner state, is the one who was chosen for God's inheritance. Ha'am bachar l'nachalo lo. That shift to Israelites, that's who's being asked to sing along. The people at the time of the temple, join me, know that this home is God's home. God may be the creator of the whole world, but we as a people, we have a special relationship to this God of justice. For even though Adonai is in heaven, verse 13, he looks down, Ra'ah et kol b'nei ha'adam, and he sees all the children of Adam, Adam, the whole of humanity, back to a particular place and yet a universal quality, examining all who dwell on the earth. Verse 15, who fashions together their heart, is an ambiguous phrase. I left it with some of that more literal translation, who fashions together their heart, which could imply that he brings people together through faithfulness, who are faithful, who are in awe of God. Other commentaries, first I want to point out that for the Bible, heart is more than an organ, of course. It's a metaphor for mindfulness. So it's more than our feelings, it's our thoughts, it's our choice, ability to choose and what we choose. So heart becomes our mind. Others would say that who fashions together their heart, that as a heart is composed of many components, that's what's getting fashioned together, who fashions together many components to make a heart. And I mentioned last week this theme of Within the heart is the inclination for good and the inclination for evil. And they are at odds with each other. And God fashioned those two tendencies together to create our mindfulness and our possibilities of good or bad. And that God understands all their doings. This particular psalm is read on Shabbat. It's read on holidays. It's a psalm that acknowledges that God knows our heart. That God, there is no hiding from God. God knows, understands all their doings. Mevinit kol ma'asehem is again echoing the fact that God knows our hearts. And then the punchline where we were going, no ruler is delivered by great might, a warrior is not rescued by great strength. Horses are a sham for deliverance, and a great army does not enable escape. We're going to conclude with those similar idea in Zechariah. Behold, the eye of Adonai is toward the awestruck, toward them that yearn for God's kindness. So the notion here, le meyechalim chasto, for the one who yearns for God's kindness, is going to be in the very end, ka'asher yechalnu lach, the last phrase, verse 22, may your kindness, Adonai, be upon us as we have yearned for you. So a closing thought, and then we're going to listen to that 2 minutes of recording, and then if you have 5 or 10 minutes of reactions. And that is why I think I am drawn to this psalm on this day. I'm beginning to feel the exhaustion of COVID, where one day blurs into the next, and not having the texture of seeing each of you in person. That creates that three-dimensional experience. And instead, it's not talking to a wall, it's not that extreme, but it's talking to you in two-dimensional ways rather than in the fullness of your presence. Creates a quality of fatigue for me. And I'm feeling it as the weeks go on now. And this psalm, I mean, it's the Hanukkah psalm, is know that we have to know our human humility. That I was listening to the interview with our medical experts before this morning before Congress, before the Senate, which is to say, we're reminded of the uncertainties of COVID and the power of nature. It's very humbling. Here we are in the 21st century, needing to be indoors, aware of the unknown, power that threatens us, literally threatens our lives. And that our ability to be Ashrei Ha'am, to be a people that is calm and thereby content, is the sense of trust, that ultimately nature is good, that ultimately it's not chaos. This is a challenge that will get somehow worked through and solved. And as plagues in the past have come and gone, this too will go. How is an unknown, but a trust in the Creator, a trust foundationally. This is what Einstein said, that the key question is ultimately that science can't answer is creation kind? Is it good? That's a statement of faith, that the world in which we live is foundationally created to be sustaining and kind and more, to monitor and acknowledge the importance of individually doing what's right. Wearing that mask to protect others is our duty, and it matters to our Creator. And so with that, Eric, you will now play the closing. Debbie Friedman, not by might, not by power, but with the Spirit of God. And just play like a minute of it.
By Spirit alone shall we all
Thank you. So again, shall we all live in peace? So Debbie Friedman changed her own song from all men shall live in peace to we shall all. And that's the nature of her translation of the prophet Zechariah and how ears and sensibilities have changed in these last 45 years. So some reactions. Let me take 2 or 3 comments. What impressed or struck you, or questions might you have about the weave and power of Psalm 33?
Well, if nobody's going to say anything, I've got a little something. I'll stand by, though, if somebody else has something to say.
Go ahead, Richard.
Okay. I was thinking about verse 3, sing a new song, play skillfully amid shouts of joy. And the first thing that you think of is a new song, new words, maybe new melody and things like that. Perhaps, though, what this could also encompass is a new approach to the old song, the old words, and making them your own in a new way so that they're fresh and new. I'll leave it at that.
So I just want to honor the insight, and that's to say, again, what we call new doesn't mean something that's never been said before. It means new for us in some way, either new in terms of how the poem is organized, or new, as Richard highlights, in how we experience and internalize the words. Let it be fresh is another way of saying, let it be new. I will add, in terms of that verse, the word that I translate amid shouts of joy is in Hebrew, truah, which we know as the shofar call, right? Truah. And as truah is used elsewhere in the Bible, it's not only the sound of the shofar, but it's shouting for joy. In this case, in some cases, I've left it as truah in the past, because some of those psalms were more identified with Rosh Hashanah and holidays. But here, what is new is let us as a community sing together in this very artfully composed psalm. What I didn't emphasize, because of lack of time, is what is particularly noteworthy in this psalm is the repetition of key words. Almost every verse has a word that's used in another verse, so that there's this echoing going on throughout this psalm, words being repeated, but sometimes in different ways. It's a very tight weave linguistically. Any other reactions to Psalm 33? Is that Miriam? Go ahead, Rabbi Miriam Van Brault. I want to celebrate Miriam having received rabbinic ordination in the last 2 weeks. Rabbi Miriam.
So much, thank you. I loved verse 15. And the reason I love it is because it seems to turn inside out the Na'aseh v'nishma, where we are asked to do and then to understand. And here, God understands what is done by us. And the fact that that our hearts are involved in this, which adds that dimension of kavanah, the intention behind what we do. So it beautifully envelops all that comes before and then comes after.
So let me echo and reinforce Rabbi Miriam's insight. You know, when the Torah is given at Mount Sinai, Miriam made reference to the Israelites' answer, we will do and then we will hear. So that's a statement of commitment. I'll do it, I trust you, then you'll explain what it is I've committed to. Here in verse 15, God fashions, so God does, and then God understands. In that sense, there's a parallel, and what Miriam focuses in on is heart, and her love of this word here, verse 15, of God fashioning our hearts. Let me just pause to give you some different translations to show you the challenge of translation. I translated this as who fashioned together their heart. Martin Cohen, who fashioned together the heart in all its complexity. Art Scroll, who fashions their hearts all together. I guess I don't have. And here's one comment on that. So one way it's understood is that all hearts could be seen as the same. So here's a nice teaching of the rabbis from Sanhedrin, from the Talmud 37a. When a human mints coins, the coins are all stamped and look identical. But God formed Adam, and each descendant is unique in appearance. And elsewhere in the Talmud Brachot 58a says, just as no two faces are identical, so each personality is also unique. And so, although God fashioned these hearts, what the rabbis have underneath that is that every heart is unique, and somehow allowing the poetry of the hearts are woven together as creation, or is complex in its own entity. Every heart is complex.
And yet when we, in thinking about our modern times, think about how we operate and what we do when we are like-hearted with one another.
Lovely. To be like-hearted, and that's implied in this verse 15. Hayotzer, and fashions is also that of a sculptor. You know, the one who fashions together their hearts and understands all their doings. I'm always mindful of time, and it's 10:38. I want to highlight that this week we have a bar mitzvah on Thursday, so there will be class tomorrow, but not on Thursday. I noted at the outset, my goal is to get through Psalm 41, which would represent the first book of Psalms, and then maybe once a week, and then off a little bit with around the holidays. And I do look to resume after the holidays, because there's still going to be 109 Psalms after the 41. And I just am so gratified by your presence and my own discovery of the power and artistry of these Psalms. And it's motivating me to want to sing God's praises. So with that, I invite those who would like to say Kaddish to join together as we conclude with the mitzvah of answering Amen. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah
Amen.
v'alma divra kirutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayechon v'yamechon v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael ba'agala u'bizman kari v'imru Amen. Yehei Rabba mevarach le'olam olmei Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei dekudsha barichu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran v'yama v'imru Amen. Yehei Shlama Rabba Min Shemata V'chayim Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen. Osei Shalom V'ramav Hu Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael Kol Yoshvei Tevel V'imru Amen. Again, thanks to each of you for sharing in the Psalm 33. Psalm 34 tomorrow has a song within the song, one of my most favorite Shlomo Carlebach songs is tomorrow, and that'll be a large part of our focus. Look forward to seeing you at 10 tomorrow, Psalm 34. All the best.